Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. We have a face cam. What do you think? It's not looking too bad. I probably need to do a little bit of work here on making the shed look a bit more camera friendly. But anyway, a few days ago, Microsoft and Asobo held a global preview event for Microsoft Flight Sim 2024. Now, there's a ton of cool info that came out of it. It's like an hour and a half long though, so I watched the whole thing, kind of distilled it all down in my mind, and I thought I'd report back to you with what I thought was the most important things to me as like a hardcore flight simmer. Now, the first thing they touched on was feedback from the community regarding Flight Sim 2020. And the first thing that came up was improvement to the sim's technical quality and kind of like the overall realism, which is fair enough. I mean, even if we were to come out now with Flight Sim 2030 in a few years, I think realism is probably going to be the first thing we talk about. The job is never really done with something like that. A big thing, though, was that people wanted more goals. And I know a lot of people that were quite excited to try the sim when it first came out. They flew over the house, they did a couple of landings, then they were like, oh, what do I do now? So a bit more structure, I think, was what people wanted. On the other hand, some people just found the whole thing far too daunting. So, it's quite a complex thing if you're new to it. So a bit more structured tutorials and learning opportunities were a big request during the development of Flight Sim 2020. Another thing was low altitude visual quality. They were saying that when helicopters became a thing in the sim, all of a sudden people could just land anywhere, and whereas before you were limited to airports, so they really had to kind of up their game a little bit somewhat to make the world look a bit more visually pleasing depending on where you land, because of course with a helicopter you land wherever you want. Finally, of course, it's always going to be a thing, I suppose, more aircraft variety, specifically helicopters. So it was this community feedback that guided 2024's development. Now, I've heard from a few more serious simmers, shall we say, that they're a little bit unhappy with this gamification layer that's been put on top of their precious sim. Now, I would say to that, be very, very careful what you wish for, because in order for us hardcore simmers to have this incredible sandbox to play in, it requires the existence of a profitable company to build the sim for us and maintain it. Therefore, Microsoft and Asobo, they've got to keep the tills ringing. So by increasing the appeal of the sim to a wider audience, I think is a very good way to do that. So I say good on them, good luck, and it's not like VATSIM's going away. It's not like they've reduced the level of realism in the sim to appeal to a wider audience. It's going to be fine. I think we just need to chill out a little bit. One thing, though, that I've seen people worry about is this new thin client architecture, whereby the sim will stream in what it needs from the internet kind of on an on-demand basis versus having it all stored on your local disk. During the presentation, though, they confirmed that the community folder remains a thing. It's not going anywhere. You can still install all your add-ons locally, just the same as it was in 2020. But as for everything else in the core of the sim, it's all going to come from the cloud and is downloaded as you need it. There is a rolling cache, so say you fly over an airport, it's going to download it for the first time, then it will keep it in your cache on your SSD, or hard drive, and then hopefully you won't need to download it next time that you fly over it. However, as you fill up your cache, stuff will start dropping off the end, so probably over time you will have to re-download stuff as you fly over things. I'm hoping you can increase the size of the cache, because if you've got a big SSD, you might be able to say, here's 500 gig, fill your boots, which I'm hoping that's the case. The benefit, though, to users is that the install time and install size will be massively, massively reduced. So 2024 takes 23 gig of disk space, and depending on your internet connection, can install and be launched within 5 minutes, versus 2020 taking 2 hours to install and launch while taking 159 gigabytes of data. I know there's a lot of concern out there for those of you on slower internet connections, and it bothers me too. It'll be interesting to see how this actually affects people once the sim is out. Maybe it won't be as bad as we're fearing. I mean, Asobo, surely they've tested this. They must know what they're doing, you would hope. Time's going to have to tell on that one, though, unfortunately. The advantage, though, to a cloud-based approach is that when there's a world update in 2024, you don't need to go searching through the content manager to download it and install it, because they'll just put it in the cloud. And as you fly over it, you'll be streaming in the latest world update content. So there's pros and cons, that's for sure, but I do definitely feel the concern of those of you out there with slower internet connections. Hopefully it won't be as bad as we're fearing. Now, this is the good stuff. Next up, they talked about sim quality and realism, and they walked us through 4 core features they've developed to bring us a more realistic sim. First up, their new surface aerodynamic system, which is where you can have very, very small areas of the aircraft that can have their surfaces simulated in terms of aerodynamics, as small as 10 centimeters to 100 centimeters, and this allows for much more complex shapes of aircraft, maybe planes that have got multiple wings, multiple fuselages, and the engines are now modelled in terms of aerodynamics, which is very, very cool. Which then led them on, of course, to explaining about their new optimized CFD system, which is a system that simulates how air flows around the aircraft. The example they gave was that if you're on the ground and then you kind of push your engines up to full power, that air is going to shoot out the back of your engines and then inevitably hit the tail of the aircraft, and you're going to feel that as the pilot flying. The cool thing here, though, is that they said this is multi-threaded, so this won't have any impact, hopefully, on the actual sim itself. Really good to see. Wake turbulence was discussed, which is a feature I'm very much looking forward to. It can apparently hang around for up to 6 minutes, so if a plane takes off in front of you, you're going to want to give it a minute before you line up and take off yourself. As a VATSIM flyer, you often get held up by ATC to give time for the wake turbulence of the plane in front to dissipate. However, I don't think it's actually ever mattered in Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. It's just something that VATSIM simulates, and good on them, they should. But actually having the effects of wake turbulence now in the sim is very, very cool. Again, all multi-threaded, so it shouldn't impact on performance at all. Finally, they've said they've made improvements to the atmosphere, so we now have updrafts, wind shear, and turbulence, which can all be impacted by the sun and overall temperature of the air. Here we see a visual where we can see all 4 of these systems working together. We can see the air coming into the engine and then coming out the back of the engine, impacting the tail of the aircraft as we discussed. Then as we roll down the runway, you can see the wake turbulence being left behind. And if you pay attention to the skies, you can see the atmosphere simulation at work as well with the updrafts, etc. Taking off and turning, you can see the wake turbulence remaining on the runway, increasing the importance of giving separation for aircraft after taking off. Another thing is that the atmospheric simulations could potentially push this wake turbulence from the runway we took off on into another nearby runway at the same airport. So there's a ton of detail being added here. I absolutely love it. Now, the same principles we've discussed here can also be applied to choppers, so any chopper flyers out there, I think you're going to have a great time with this sim. Next, they stressed how much more detail we're going to have in the world and how that translates into how we fly. The ground is now way more detailed and way more complex. Now, the plane will interact with all of this. They were saying how in 2020 you could basically land wherever you want. You could land in a field as long as it's flat enough and the plane would pretty much accept it. However, in 2024, it's going to be very different. If you decide to land in a field, maybe you're in a small aircraft, you're probably going to do like a little lap of the field just to make sure it's suitable for you to land in, because the plane will now react to the ground in a much more detailed way. Similar story for water. For those of you that like the seaplanes, the plane will be impacted by the waves, the height of the waves, and also the direction of the waves. So you're going to have to pay a lot more attention now in 2024. It's really great to see. Now, the CFD airflow system we spoke about with the planes can also impact the environment as well, such as vegetation, as well as creating particle effects. Now, here we can see a helicopter interacting with some red smoke, but it could also interact with dust on the ground. So you're taking off from a dusty field, you're going to see a similar thing here. Really, really great. Another thing they spoke about was scene complexity, and this one really blew me away. So here you can see a mesh of the ground in Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, which, okay, fair enough, it looks all right. Now let's look at the same thing in 2024. They've increased the level of detail by 4,000 times. Now this all happens dynamically, so as you get closer to the ground, the complexity increases. Obviously, there's no point rendering all this detail when you're cruising at 30,000 feet. But this is all to say the ground is very, very meaningful now, as all these surfaces will have a direct impact on how your plane feels on the ground. Super cool stuff. Textures have seen a big improvement too. Here's a screenshot from the runway and taxiway markings in 2020. And then we switch over to 2024, you can see there's a huge difference there. So suffice to say then, Microsoft Flight Sim 24 is looking awesome. I can't wait to fly it. It's not long now. What are we now? Like a month away? Under a month away? It's going to be absolutely incredible. I can't wait to get stuck into it all. And if you're not subscribed already, make sure you are, because we're going to be doing a ton of content around this sim when it comes out. And we're going to be doing lots of live streams, lots of comparisons, lots and lots of stuff. Get subbed. Also, hitting the like button on today's video really, really helps a ton. I'm going to leave it there, folks. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think of the cam and maybe what we could do with the studio. I'm thinking maybe some lights like over here. I don't know. It's all up in the air at the minute. But until next time, take care of yourselves, be good to each other, and as always, happy flying.